never planned. And then don't come again.
My mom wants to watch it also.
All right,
Well,
so we're recording, so just be aware.
You know,
Watch
these
yourself.
after-service discussions can be very, very powerful things. That's how Friends of Sabeel, that's how Sabeel got started.
That's right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's wonderful. Well, I want to just welcome everyone again. And before I introduce our speaker today, I want to give also just a big thank you to our two co-chairs for the Holy Land Committee, and that's Nancy Adams and Kirk Campbell. And they're going to be at Kirk's today. Going to be fielding questions also and moderating after Jonathan's talk. And this is it's going to be a several part series on the Holy Land, and each of the forums is going to be recorded, and we had one last week, and then this week, and then I think we have a couple more. But today we're honored to host Jonathan Kuttab, and I'm going to say something personal in a moment about my relationship with Jonathan, but we'll begin by just saying he's going to speak about his book that was just released called Beyond the Two-State Solution. The book, I believe, is available for download at a link in our Crossroads article this past Friday. And after this brief introduction, John's going to speak for about 20 minutes, and then we'll open the floor up for questions. Jonathan is a co-founder of the Palestinian human rights group Al-Haq and co-founder of Nonviolence International. He began his career as a lawyer with a degree from University of Virginia's Law School, became a well-known international human rights attorney, and he continues to practice law in the United States, in Palestine, and in Israel. In addition, Jonathan serves on the board of Bethlehem Bible College and is president of the board of Holy Land Trust. He's a co-founder and board member of the Just Peace Advocates. He was the head of the legal committee negotiating the Cairo Agreement of 1994 between Israel and the PLO. Jonathan, on a personal note, want to say that I know Jonathan because we attended the same church when I was growing up. So Jonathan was always someone that I saw in church. His kids and I grew up around the same time. I'm a little bit older than them. And it's such a blessing. When I first moved here to DC, I ran into Jonathan and Beth and Yasmin and Saji, their two kids, at the National Cathedral for one of our the Bethlehem simulcast services. I think that's what it was, if I remember correctly. And it was just a wonderful opportunity to kind of reconnect and know that we're in the same area now. Jonathan, such an honor and a pleasure for us to have you with us, and we'll turn it over to you now. Welcome.
Thank you. It's it really warms my heart because your father and I have been working together, have been friends. I think he's the closest thing I have to my own pastor or priest. And we keep running into each other in all sorts of different places. The combination of faith and commitment to social issues, political issues, very, very deep thing that binds both of us. I should mention that after every sermon, which as a proper Anglican sermon is never longer than 11 minutes. And whenever there are foreigners and you have to give a 2-minute translation, so that cuts it down to 9 minutes. But always after the service, we gather in the parish hall and we discuss. We start with the sermon and we end up talking about everything, politics, violence, non-violence, heaven and hell, relations with Muslims, with the Jews, with settlers, but all in the spirit of really seeking God's will in the current world. So to jump right into the book that I've just written, and you can download it for free. I put the link in the chat box, but I think it's also available elsewhere. It's called Beyond the Two-State Solution. And basically it has 3 sections. The first section, probably the biggest, explains why the two-state solution doesn't work anymore. And this is a difficult task because I believed in it. We worked for it for a long, long time. And it was systematically undermined, mostly by the settlement agreement and the Israeli government. So I tried to show why it is no longer relevant, while at the same time it continues to predominate the discussion. So that's the most, I think, useful part of the book, the start of the book, to show why it is no longer possible, even if it were desirable, to think in terms of a Palestinian state in 22% of Palestine. The second, which is the creative part of the book, is a vision that I present. And it's really thinking out of the box, because people who work on peace and justice in the Middle East have been basically paralyzed. They don't know what to do. They know that the program that they were with, the ideas that they were supporting, don't work. We can't have a Palestinian state, period. It's not going to happen. So what do you do? What do you do? And I try to do it in a way that's empathetic. I try to understand, what is it that the Zionists want? And what is it that the Palestinian nationalists want? And can you provide them with a solution that gives them what they want without giving them exclusivity? You see, Zionism says what we need is a Jewish state, and the state has to be as Jewish as France is French. And Palestinian nationalists say Palestine Arabiya. Palestine is Arab. What is this? This is settler colonialism. These guys don't belong here. Palestine is Arab. Well, these two movements necessarily clash, because each of them is laying exclusive claim to the same area. And I'm saying, is there a way that you can share it, that it gives you everything you want except exclusivity? Gives you everything that you really need without denying, demonizing, destroying, ethnically cleansing, delegitimizing, dispossessing the other. Can you really live and thrive and achieve everything you want in a new hybrid form of state? And obviously this leads towards a one-state solution, but I also wanted to deal with the problems with the one-state solution. First and foremost is the demographic problem. The idea that once we get 51%, we can do what we want. We can totally oppress or negate or delegitimize or disenfranchise or even ethnically cleanse the other. I said, no, you can do it. You can share without. You can have constitutional framework that addresses your need regardless of who's got 40% and who's got 60%, because you really can't ignore each other. You really can't have a solution in which, other than one in which both sides participate and share. So I get a little creative, and I try to address the fears, the problems that particularly the Israeli side has. Many people have objected that I bend over backwards to try and show empathy or understanding for the other side. I don't talk enough about the Nakba. I don't talk enough about human rights violation. I don't talk enough about racism and discrimination. But that's not what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to see if I can find something that both sides can live with. And then some of the ideas are creative. Some of the ideas are really interesting. I also struggle with what's called what I call the Holocaust Syndrome, which acknowledges that the Holocaust has created a trauma for Israeli Jews that makes any solution, two-state, one-state, no state, impossible, because they're traumatized, and legitimately so. No amount of weapons and security arrangements can really make them feel secure. So I try to address these security fears in some creative ways, and maybe that's the fun part. One of them is spend 10% of the defense budget of the new state on a ministry dedicated to coexistence, understanding, tolerance, joint projects, teaching each group the history of the other, because that provides you with a lot more security than buying more tanks and more airplanes. Because the biggest danger to the average Israeli Jew today is a 12-year-old schoolgirl with a pair of scissors in her pocket that she wants to stab somebody and she doesn't care. So how do you address that unless you really deal with that security? The other, a little bit more controversial, is I said we'll make the defense minister, the head of the army, the head of the navy, the head of the nuclear whatever, always constitutionally to be a Jew, with his deputy always being an Arab, and every other position in the army will be on the basis of merit. Also, the head of the police will always be a Palestinian Arab with a Jewish deputy, constitutionally. This way, at least you address at some level the security fears of both sides. And I make equality an essential part of the constitution of the new state, regardless of who is higher and who is lower, who's 60% and who's 40%. This way, Palestinians aren't worried about every single new immigrant that comes in, and Jews aren't worried about every single Palestinian baby who's born, because your rights are guaranteed regardless of what is your percentage in the population. The constitutional court of 5 people, 2 Jew, 2 Arab minimum, and their decision has to be at least 4/5. So I try to create a legal framework. The last part of the book, and my time is almost getting up, is a portion I really didn't want to put in the book because it deserves a book by itself, is how do we get from here to there? But everybody who read or who heard my idea says, well, how do you move there? How do you get there? That's a whole book by itself, but I have a small chapter that deals with specific concrete steps that we can take to move in that general direction. What I wanted in the book really was to change the conversation, was really to start people of goodwill from both sides and outsiders, third parties, to have a vision, to have a dream, to have a program of what peace would look like when it comes, to have something to work towards as we work for peace and justice. And like I said, this book is not for anybody who is stuck in one of these positions. If you really want your state to be as Jewish as France is French, if you really insist that Palestine is Arab and all these people don't belong here, this book is not for you. Sorry. You can continue fighting forever and ever, because you will never succeed. Neither side will ever be able to negate and totally destroy the other side. It's easy enough to say that the Arabs cannot do it because they're the weaker party. But I've said it in synagogues. I've said it to Zionists who are even right-wing, as well as middle-of-the-road Zionists. Is, look, you guys, with every possible advantage you can imagine, you have failed. You have failed. Half of the people living under your control today are not Jewish, and they're going nowhere. You have not erased Palestinians as an idea, as an entity, as an identity, and as a physical presence. You can oppress them, you can shoot, kill, imprison, disenfranchise, besiege them, rule them, whatever you want. You cannot eliminate us. We continue to exist. Even though we are weak, we are subdivided, we have corrupt leadership, even collaborationist leadership, we have no weapons, we have, and you have all the advantages, and you still have not succeeded and cannot succeed. Cannot succeed. So you have to start thinking outside the box, and you have to think, how can we live together? Because live together we will. The only question is, will we live in an apartheid state or will we live in a democratic state? Is there going to be equality, some relative measure of justice, or is it going to be oppression? And I tell them, look, 100 years ago, women didn't even have the vote in the United States. In the United States, we didn't even have the vote. 150 years ago, African Americans were actually sold and bought as chattel. They were listed as goods, not as human beings. You know, I remember the story about the woman who escaped from the South, and she was chased by these slave hunters, and she ended up on the second floor of a room, and they were going to catch her. So she threw her baby out of the window because she'd rather her baby die than be enslaved. And she tried to kill herself, but she couldn't. Well, when they took her back, they didn't know what to charge her with, because they couldn't charge her with murder, because that would acknowledge her baby was a human being. So they charged her with destruction of property. That's like a century ago. And in the life of nations, that's nothing. So that's the negative part. The positive part is people can and will live together. Germans and French were killing each other by the millions, utterly destroying each other's towns and villages just a couple of generations back. And the other day, I was listening to a TV commercial for a German car, and it had a nice little French tune. Nobody even thought about it. It was the most normal thing. Because people can and do and will live together. The only question is, will they live as equals or as apartheid? And apartheid just doesn't work anymore. It's a war crime. It's a crime against humanity. It's not acceptable today at all. I tell some of my Israeli friends, I said, the only problem with Israel is it's an anachronism. 2, 3, 4 centuries ago, it would be perfectly fine. But in this century, no, it is not acceptable. But we can live together, and we should learn to live together. That's my 20 minutes, Sari. And now we get to the fun part, where we have a discussion and questions and answers, because I like that part with a well-informed, intelligent group. It's much more fun than if I had to spend all my time explaining what happened in 48 and what happened in 67, blah, blah, blah.
Shukran, Jonathan. I'll turn it over to Kirk. Actually, Kirk, you're going to moderate this, I believe.
Yeah, thanks, Sari. And Jonathan, thank you again for coming and talking to us. I want to say, before anything else, that I was deeply impressed by the concern reflected in your book for the legitimate views and interests of both Israelis and Palestinians. So thank you for that. We're gonna open it up for question and answer here. I'll start with a couple of questions, but if anyone has questions, you can either raise your hand or put a question in the chat room, and we'll take it from there. Jonathan, I wanted to start with really just first a process question about how do you write a book like this? It's a very kind of intellectual thought piece about, coming from a place of, I won't say despair to characterize your views that way, but coming from there's a hope that's become impossible to realize. What can we do next? And so when I ask you, like, what's the process of writing a book like this, I mean, to what extent, like, brainstorming by yourself or with other people or consulting with think tanks, if you could just kind of talk a little bit about those dynamics of writing the book, I'd really like to hear that.
Well, originally it started as an intellectual exercise. I was talking with a Jewish American attorney, Robert Herbst, and originally we were going to do it as a joint book. And basically I was asking him, what is it that Zionists really want? Because I know for a fact that Palestinians don't necessarily want a state. They want freedom. They want sovereignty. They want self-determination. And if a state gives them that, well and good. But if a state or something that's called a state doesn't give them that, that's not good enough. So I said, what do Zionists want? And I remember one rabbi in New Jersey, fairly middle of the road rabbi. I said, Rabbi, you're a Zionist. You want a Jewish state. What is a Jewish state? What does a Jewish state do for you? What is it that you really want? You can't circumcise a state. What's a Jewish state to you? What does it mean? And he thought about it and says, well, I want a state where any Jew, anytime, no questions asked, can go and live and be able to defend himself. I said, maybe I can give you something better. How about a state where any Jew, anytime, no questions asked, can go and live where he doesn't need to defend himself because nobody's out to get him? It's possible. It is possible to have such a state that has a Jewish character and an Arab character, that recognizes and embraces and accepts and provides a refuge for Jews and a center for Jewish life, but that doesn't negate Palestinians and doesn't oppress Palestinians and doesn't eliminate Palestinians. So this is how the process started. So started to get a list. What is it that you really want? What are your minimum demands or requirements? And can I address them without negating the other? That's intellectually how the process starts. And I didn't run a poll, and I didn't do anything systematic or scientific. It was just a thought exercise.
Yeah, thank you. So it is, as you say, it's a very, I think it's a very objective and reflective thought piece, and you lay out really well the characteristics that the minimum requirements. At one point, you devote a chapter to minimum requirements that each side needs to feel fulfillment, I guess, in a future state or entity. The sticking points are in implementation and like getting traction and moving in that direction. And so, I just wonder what leaders and institutions are kind of available to begin the implementation process. That's maybe this is the next book that you referred to earlier, but if you have any preliminary thoughts on that.
Well, I've spent a lot of my time trying to understand Israel and Israelis and Zionists in their own terms. And I find that there are two major obstacles for any kind of peace, whether it's two state, one state, no state, whatever, confederation, federation. The first is the huge imbalance of power. When one side has all the power, we control all the land. We have the military power. We are technologically advanced. We have the support of the United States. We can ignore everybody else. We can dominate the whole region. We can project our military and political power throughout the region. We can determine what happens with Iran. And if necessary, Pakistan too, after that. We have nuclear weapons. We have everything. And Palestinians have nothing, nothing. They are fragmented, they are weak, they are powerless, their own leaders, their own friends are worse than their enemies. So why should we give them anything? People don't necessarily give up their privileges unless they're forced to. So we have to address that imbalance of power. We have to level the playing field a little. We have to introduce a price to be paid for that. So we have to address that. But the second obstacle to peace is what I call the Holocaust Syndrome. The fact that with all these advantages, Israeli Jews are traumatized. They've gone through the Holocaust. They've gone through millennia of anti-Semitic discrimination and persecution. So that they're double afraid of anything. They've been told you can only rely on yourself. You can't rely on international law or public opinion or the progressive world because they abandoned you when you most needed them. So you can only rely on power. So how do you address somebody like that? Even when you try to give them what they want, they're still suspicious. They don't trust anybody. So if you're trying to reduce their power to end the imbalance, you're reinforcing their fears and their trauma. So how do you deal with that? How do you deal with somebody who's so traumatized, but who's also very powerful and still wants more power? And every time people talk about peace, they talk about Israel's security. They're reinforcing actually that trauma, that Israel needs security when in fact it doesn't. It needs peace. It needs justice. It needs normalcy, not security. So you have to address these two obstacles to get anywhere. And I think until Israeli Jews are healed from that trauma of the Holocaust, and until the imbalance of power is addressed somehow, everything else is hakifadi. We're just wasting our breath, I think.
Okay. I may have some follow-ups for you on that, but first let me go to, I see Kay has her hand up. Kay, we'll get to you next, but first there's a question in the chat room. It's from Mary Jane. She asks, do you think if Israel becomes more secular, would that help or hurt peace? For example, some feel that since Ireland has become more secular or is more secular, that has helped it improving relations with England.
Well,
Jonathan, you muted.
Believe it or not, in this very small volume, I even addressed that issue. because secular Jews, certainly Reform Jews and conservative Jews, have less religious freedom in Israel today than they do in the United States and elsewhere. So I try to provide a solution for them as well by having a parallel system of civil laws as well as religious laws, so that people who don't want to be Jews, who don't want to be governed by Jewish halakha religious law, can still participate in the life of the country, can still marry, can still divorce, can still inherit without being forced to go through the Orthodox rabbinical court system. So yes, I think the new state will have to provide a solution for secular as well as religious Jews. You see, you have to understand a little bit about the history. Religious Jews started out being anti-Zionists. Zionism was a secular movement. So Ben-Gurion reached a compromise with these Jews. Says, look, drop your opposition to Zionism. Allow us to speak on your behalf with the Arabs and with the British and everywhere else. And in return, we'll give you exclusive control over religious life of Jews in the new state that is going to be coming. And to this day, secular Jews suffer from that particular deal that Ben-Gurion made. Now, in recent years, the religious Jews have started getting involved in politics in a very right-wing, racist, aggressive way, but still the basic control that they have over personal status matters of Jews in Israel is a problem that needs to be addressed, and I do address it in my book.
Right, thank you. Hey, you're unmuted. Why don't you go ahead and ask your question, please?
Thank you, Kirk. Thank you so very much, Jonathan. This is fascinating. I have 2 points. Number one, that wherever one is born and however they're born, they will always be that person. This just goes back to various travels I've had the privilege of doing, that you will always be who you're born. So I think that is part of the situation. The Jews will always be Jews. The Palestinians will always be Palestinians / Arabs. I had a very interesting situation many years ago of being in Jordan and swimming in the Dead Sea. Not but a couple of weeks ago, I saw a fabulous program about the lack of the Dead Sea and Israel's control of the water going into the Dead Sea, or the lack thereof. The fabulous, beautiful area that was around the Dead Sea is now potholes, and the Dead Sea has shrunk to such a level, its existence and future is in question. The Israelis control the water going into the Dead Sea, and you talk about their control of Iran. That's just outrageous. The spa that was there is no longer there. I'm very surprised that Jordan has not pushed back against this. I think perhaps there are issues in trying, but that sort of dominance is really unconscionable. So I guess it's more of a statement than a question.
Yeah. Well, Israel, there's no question, has power.
Yeah.
And has the ability to project that power throughout the region.
Yeah.
Jordan is, for all intents and purposes, a demilitarized state that acts as a buffer against the rest of the Arab world.
Yes.
But my point is that type of dominance is a temporary state of affairs in historic terms.
I hope so.
This is what history teaches us. Empires rise and fall. And this mini empire that arose in less than 100 years. It reached its pinnacle and started its decline within less than 1 century. In the lives of nations, this is like nothing. This is really nothing. They started with zero, built themselves into a little mini empire, and started a very rapid decline. People inside know this much better than people outside. People from the outside looking in, they say, ooh, this is a very powerful state. People on the inside can see the very rapid decline, the destruction of internal, what I call soft power, the lack of freedoms, press, rule of law, the corruption, the materialism that has taken place in the place of the kibbutz and the idealism and the socialist progressive nature of the state of Israel. Today, the state of Israel does not really, if you look at it deeply, does not reflect a lot of these, you may call them soft power, but I call real, genuine power elements that it had at the beginning of its creation. Its army, for example, today has tremendous firepower. It can destroy tremendously, but only from afar. It cannot really engage directly. They couldn't even deal with Hezbollah in Lebanon, militarily on the field. Oh, they could destroy Lebanon totally. And they are threatening to do it again, as well as Gaza, but they really can't win. Even militarily, the elements of their power have dissipated.
Thank you. Sari has his hand up. Sari, go ahead, please. Sorry, let's, I think Bill needs to unmute you.
I said, let's have Nancy go, and then I'll go after her. I saw her hand up.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Sari. First of all, I just want to say, Jonathan, that I would love to sit down over a lunch and talk with you because I'm just fascinated by this. And it speaks to so much of what I believe as well. One of the things I would just say as a comment is one of the concerns that I have is that, you know, if you could possibly get a handle on the Holocaust syndrome, you've also got a Palestinian syndrome now. And you've got this coming back and forth. I mean, I talk to my friends from Gaza, and it's just so hard for them to think about peace and any way to get there. One of the programs that we support is called New Story Leadership, and it brings young people together from Palestine and Israel, usually the 20-somethings. And the point really is to be able to share stories and help understand and build the skills to be leaders of the future, to rewrite the story, very much along the lines that you talk about. And so my question really goes to, what do you see as the role of youth and the possibilities of youth and the role of women in this dynamic of change?
Well, there's no question that youth have been really the motor, the engine that has been keeping this thing going. During the first Intifada, especially, the youth were the ones who started. Right now in Jerusalem, it's the youth who are, without any leadership, without any access to resources, they are doing amazing things. But I think women have been much, much more powerful. They have been the ones who have been holding Palestinian society together. They have been the repository of the memory. They have been holding it economically together. I think about my own family. My father was a minister, and he always believed, you know, God will provide, and God does provide. But it was my mother who had to stretch his salary to cover the needs of 7 children. It was very creative, very generous, and at the same time hardworking and dedicated and thoughtful and wise. It's Mother's Day today, and my mother passed away last year. We really, really miss her wisdom, her knowledge, her love, her dedication. The women of Palestine are absolutely amazing.
Jonathan, thank you so much. Obviously, many of us have been tuned into the news the last couple of weeks and just listening to what's happening on the ground in Palestine. And it's so clear in Jerusalem, especially right now, there's no buffer, right? The minute something happens that triggers something, it's just, you feel like you're on the verge of another intifada. I mean, it's just like no buffer whatsoever. It's a tinderbox. We know this. And I think that it's really wonderful to hear, like you alluded to this, people have really advocated so much for different solutions, for certain solutions. And it's a lot of energy, a lot of time, a lot of money has gone into trying to negotiate for these particular solutions to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. On the one hand, it's so refreshing to hear someone come up with another solution that might work, because like we're stuck. There's no one will debate that. I read a book recently called Letters to My Palestinian Neighbor. I don't know if you saw it, Jonathan, had a chance to read it. Anyway, this Israeli is basically, he represents the type of Israeli you can actually work with, and he's kind of presenting the Israeli side and the Israeli psyche and all this stuff, really hoping, to reach across the aisle. And it just makes you, when you read it, you're like, wow, like it helps me humanize all this kind of stuff, and also a part of what I loved is that in his second edition of the book, he actually included at the end of the book letters from Palestinians who wrote to him, just knocking him, like he has, it's like he's open to just publishing in his book the criticism of his own thoughts. So I thought it was great. I really appreciate new ideas because we all feel stuck. My question to you is, for Palestinians, before with the two-state solution, we were just trying to convince one side to get on board with the two-state solution. Now with a new idea, it's almost like you're having to convince two sides to get it in, to agree on a new solution. So my question to you is like, yes, it's a thought, I get it. It's a thought experiment, all this kind of stuff. How much, realistically, how much hope does a new approach even have at the end of the day?
I think it has a lot of possibility once we address the power imbalance. You see, Palestinians, the PLO started out with the idea of a secular democratic state for Jews and Arabs in all of Palestine. But we were told, don't you dare go there. The minute you use the word one state, it means you don't recognize the state of Israel. It means you're trying to destroy and kill us all. It means you're an extremist. It means we can't have a conversation.
You lose your sovereignty. That's it. Yeah.
Totally. It was taboo. We were prohibited from talking one state. We say, okay. We won't tell one state, all right. We'll deal with the two-state solution. Two-state solution basically says, give up on 78% of Palestine. And let's just talk about the 22%, which is the West Bank and Gaza.
But to clarify, it's saying to Israel, give up 78%. No, it's saying to Palestinians.
To Palestinians.
78%.
Yeah.
Right. I just want to clarify.
So Palestinians says, okay, you want to give us a mini state, we'll take a mini state, but please don't keep taking pieces out of it. Don't start putting all these settlements in. Don't start. And eventually you realize there's nothing left to talk about. So I say, okay, we go back to the drawing boards. The drawing boards it is. It's all of Palestine. Mm-hmm. So I think it's going to be easier to sell the Palestinians on the idea. Any Palestinian today who insists on two states is just sort of given up, like we can't do anything. Let's just at least try and get this small piece. I had a Canadian friend who used to say, I tell my Israeli and Zionist friends, I says, congratulations, guys, you won. There's not going to be ever a Palestinian state. Now what? And they're stumped. They don't know what to say. Because for them, the sort of mirage of a possible Palestinian state sometime in the future, if we get the right leader, if we get rid of Netanyahu and Abbas, if we have a better US administration, then we'll solve the problem. And he says, no, it's not going to happen. You guys won. What are you going to do now? They don't know what to do. They can't say we want to keep it all. Okay, you want to keep it all. Under what terms? Do you want apartheid? Well, no. Then what do you do? Do you want to give people equality? Well, no. Well, then what do you want? What do you want? What do you want?
Can I ask a quick follow-up question to that? Is that okay? So Jonathan, one more point on this. Do you think, kind of using the same rationale, is that Palestinians who had given up on the kind of all of Palestine idea and went with the two-state solution, do you think by the same rationale, Israel, when confronted between the choice of sharing the land entirely versus truly only giving up 22%, that Israel might be more inclined with this solution to say, you know what, actually the two-state solution sounded really good?
That's no longer an option. Because to really create a two-state solution, you have to supplant 700,000 settlers. It's not going to happen.
Civil war.
Even 100,000 is not going to happen. We couldn't even get a freeze. We couldn't even get the 94 illegal outposts that by Israeli terms shouldn't be there. We couldn't get them dismantled. You see, if you read the book, I talk about 3 separate attempts to remove settlers. From Gaza first, then from the heart of Hebron, and from one of these settlements called Amunah, which by Israeli terms makes no sense whatsoever, needs to be removed. They couldn't remove them. So to remove 100,000 settlers, it's not going to happen. Or to say, oh yeah, you can stay, but you have to live under Palestinian law, ain't going to happen. These are privileged people who are used to privilege. And they're not going to live under Palestinian rule. So they have a problem. They have a very serious problem. And I think they are seeing this. I think in Europe, they've already lost the battle. In the United States, they're hanging on to the top 1%. And even then, there are cracks in the wall. Among the Jewish American population, they are losing the battle. It's only a few of the old billionaires who have lots of money. But among young Jews, they've lost the battle. They've lost the battle. They still have the power, but in terms of acceptance in the general population, they're losing. They're losing the battle.
Thank you. Bill, I see you have your hand up, and I have a question that I want to ask, and then we'll see where we are on time. But Bill, please go ahead.
Sure. So, Jonathan, you've spoken well about the post-Holocaust trauma of the Zionists and the bind that they're in. I'm just wondering, just thinking about how to get there from here, what is there a movement or is there a gesture that could be done that would kind of induce the Zionist powers to relinquish some of their power? I mean, I guess, is there any sign of that? Or do we just have to wait for them to age? I guess that's my question.
I don't know. It's above my pay grade. About 30 years ago, when Shamir was in power, remember Shamir? When Shamir was in power and Arafat was being slowly coaxed towards the peace negotiations. One time, Arafat announced, we need to recognize the state of Israel. And Shamir's response was, that's a declaration of war. It shows the Palestinians are getting smart. So I said, my goodness, is there anything we can say or do that will convince you that we want peace? I actually gathered a group of my Jewish Israeli friends and says, what do we do? What is it that we could possibly say or do to convince you that we want peace? And they hemmed and hawed, and they said, it's more like a fog, you know, no matter what you do, it's going to be misunderstood and misinterpreted. And then one of them said, you have to do something either dramatic or traumatic. Dramatic, like Sadat flying over to speak in the Knesset. Until his plane actually landed, the Mossad and the Israeli intelligence and the army kept insisting this is all a trick. He's not going to come. Until his plane actually landed. So what is it that Palestinians can possibly say or do? Change the charter, they change the charter. Abandon armed struggle, they've abandoned armed struggle. Go along with this A, B, C craziness, they've tried. But then they try to use nonviolence and, oh, BDS, my goodness, this is economic terrorism. Going to the ICC, the International Criminal Court, oh, this is diplomatic terrorism. We can't do that. Okay, what can we do? What can we possibly say or do to convince Israelis that we want peace? And if we do nothing, this last year, I understand, was a year when there was the least number of Israelis killed in any kind of fighting or terrorism, what they call terrorism or anything else. The least. I think there's only one or two the whole year. Israeli Jews, never mind Palestinians. It didn't do anything. It didn't change anything. It didn't convince them of anything. So there is a problem, and it needs to be addressed, and it needs genuine healing. And I don't know how to achieve it. And I don't know if it's the Palestinians who can do it or who can do it. The Arab peace plan promised them full normalization with the entire Arab and Islamic world. Didn't even get a rise out of the Israeli government. Didn't really get a consideration. So I really don't know what to do. I really don't.
Kurt, I know you had another question, but could I do a follow-up?
Please.
So what is your, I've often thought that American Jews are key in terms of, so what is, obviously you've had a lot of more interaction with American Jews than I have. What is your thought to their interest or ability to influence Zionists?
They have tremendous ability. The fact that even J Street, which I have problems with, are now saying the two-state solution is dead and we have to think beyond it. The fact that young Jewish Americans are totally turned off and do not feel at all comfortable with the policies of the State of Israel. The fact that even AIPAC now, their only power is these very rich billionaires like Adelson. But I think most American Jews are really in a bind. They're really in a bind because the majority of them are very decent people. They're progressive, they're humanitarian, they believe in equality, they believe in democracy, they believe in human rights, but they can't do anything about Israel. They're pressured to say, hey, you're living in your nice, comfortable life. The least you can do is support us. The least you can do is make sure that the administration doesn't put any conditions on us. The least you can do is keep the money rolling in and keep the US veto going. So they're caught. They really don't know what to do. They are not comfortable. I'd hate to be an American Jew at this time. I'd hate to be any Jew in Israel or America who has a conscience and who has ethics and who has morality, because they are in a bind. The only way they can continue the present situation is by supporting racism, discrimination, oppression, and suppression of Palestinians. And they don't feel comfortable doing that. To their credit, they don't feel comfortable doing that. So many of them just sort of tune out. They don't participate in the discussion. But you get somebody like Bernie Sanders, and he says, no, that's wrong. I can't accept that.
Thank you. So we're almost out of time. I do want to ask one last question, and this gets to Jonathan. You've made the point several times about the imbalance of power. It's clearly talked about in your book, and several of the questions here have been about kind of, what is the practical way forward? And I just wanted to ask or posit whether or not Israeli Arabs, because they are citizens of Israel, and because of much of what you're laying out in the book is the minimum requirements of both sides, and equality is at, I guess maybe many things are at the center of this, but certainly equality is. And I wonder that, therefore, if a starting point is Israeli Arabs taking up this idea for equality for all and kind of getting traction on that point, and just wanted to turn it back.
Israeli Arabs certainly have taken up that question. The response of the state of Israel was, you don't have rights here. Self-determination is only for Jews. A slew of laws that specifically say that rights are only for Jews and not for Arabs. You have the vote, but you members of Knesset cannot participate in governments, in coalition governments. I don't know if this is going to change now because of the total collapse of the Israeli political system. Maybe they will be able to participate in government finally. But right now, so far, from the creation of the state till this day, Arab members of Knesset have had zero political power, zero. And those who demanded that Israel, never mind the occupied territories, that Israel itself will be the state of all its citizens, have been treated as traitors and as dangerous people and have been run out. Azmi Bishara went into self-exile because he was going to be put in prison for daring to say that Israel should be the state of all its citizens. So right now what's happened is that even as the two-state solution was being destroyed with respect to the West Bank and Gaza, the nature of Israel as a democratic state for its citizens has also been destroyed. And right now, the Human Rights Watch report is extremely significant, just like the B'Tselem report, because it dropped talking about the West Bank and Gaza and says the entire state. There's only one state between the river and the sea, and it's an apartheid state. It uses different mechanisms, different laws, but the policy is the same. It favors Jews at the expense of non-Jews. It creates and maintains Jewish domination over Arabs in all of the states. That's huge. That is really huge. And I don't know how Israel can weather this particular change, because it's not an incident. It's an accumulation of events that seems to be irreversible.
Thanks, Jonathan. Friends, we've come to the end of our time. I do want to first, I just want to thank Jonathan again for your time, Jonathan, for the very thoughtful and thought-provoking discussion here. Urge everybody to download the PDF or buy the book. It's a really good read. And then if Sari, if you have any final thoughts, turn it over to you.
Thank you. Jonathan, I just want to say thank you. We know you're a busy man, and I really touched by you making this book as widely available as possible, because it really does communicate your commitment to the message that you're sending. And we just want to offer a prayer of blessing for you. Just hearing your voice just brought back so many memories of home today. And I thank you for that, that personal gift. And we want to bless you, and we want you to know that you have a church community that really cares a lot about this subject, and that you would also see us as a resource to you in the ongoing pursuit of peace and justice. So blessings to you, and we look forward to hosting you in person when things open up again. So, all right, love to the family. Thank you so much, Jonathan. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.